Welcome to Specific Love. This is the 4th edition of 20 workshop tips and tricks. Let's begin. Now in my last tips and tricks video, I showed how to check to see if a speed square is straight, or in this case, square. In my case, it was a little bit off and I needed to straighten it out just a little bit. But I had a lot of people ask me just how you do that. It's actually quite simple. If the top sticks out a little too far, you need to remove material up here. And if the bottom sticks out too far, or if the top sticks in too far, then you need to remove a little material down here. But you gotta make sure you do it fully straight and even across the whole side here. So let me show you how to do that. First off, we wanna get a nice sheet of sandpaper. We want at least 220 or higher. Then you want to take your speed square, whatever side sticks out further, you're going to stick to the top of the sandpaper. In my case, it was the bottom stuck out a little bit too much. We're then going to stick it there and drag it a couple times across your sandpaper. And by doing that, everything is going to stay nice and even because you're just staying in one straight, even motion, but you're going to have more material removed from the side that stays on the paper the longest. You ever been in a process of trying to put in a small nail and it just keeps bending on you? Well, here's a great way to do it. When you get to the point if it's gonna start bending on you, pause for a second, grab a pair of pliers, and you wanna wrap around the nail. This will provide a guide for your nail so it's less likely to bend. Then take a hammer, tap it in as close as you can, and finish it off with your hammer. It's a great way to put in a small nail without it bending on you. Rags are always important in a shop, and I find myself cutting up old shirts and towels to make those rags. A lot of times you'll just take a razor blade, throw it on your bench, and you can just cut across it. Now, that'll not only dull up your blade quickly, but I can scratch up your bench. Let me show you another way to do this. Now you want to take your utility knife and you want to stick it in your vise. This will act like a third hand, holding it nice and tight. And then you take whatever fabric you're using and you want to just run it across the blade. Have you ever been using a utility knife and you accidentally drag it across the ground or concrete and you just dull up the tip? Of course, you can replace it, but let's just say you didn't have any additional blades. Here's a quick way to get that sharp again. Okay, the tip of this blade is nice and dull. As you can see there, it's not even cutting through paper. So what you want to do is you want to take a pair of pliers and you want to grab the tip of this blade right down here where it's dull, just the tip of it, and you want to very carefully snap it off. Alright, now you should have a nice sharp edge again. Let's try it. Oh yeah, there we go. Cutting through that paper with ease. That's how you get a sharp edge on a used utility knife. Now on a rare occasion, I need to go back into the trash can where I've been throwing a bunch of stuff to find something I need. And I don't want to reach in and find an old razor blade and get cut up, or anything sharp for that matter. So here's a little tip. If you take an old soda can and you take your razor blades or any other sharp items and you stick it inside, now you can have a collection of those items and it's easily kept from you cutting yourself, or when you go to take your trash bag out, you don't have to worry about it puncturing the bag. A lot of times when I get done using my orbital sander, I find out that the outer edges usually get used up a lot more than the center. The center usually has a lot of fresh material left. So I discovered this hand sander that uses the same hook and loop system as the orbital sander. The great thing about it is you can continue to use those pads, and I've also found it's one of those sanders I go to a lot more often than the other standard version. So I'm going to put a link to this in the description, so check it out. If you're ever in your shop and you get a small cut, you don't want to get any finish or dirt in those wounds. So if you take a little bit of CA glue and you fold that skin back over, rub a little CA glue on it, give it a moment for that to dry, and it should seal it back up. The medical community's been doing this for kids for years. Now you may have noticed a lot of times when your hands are really dry or in the winter, it's a little hard to remove the lids off of some CA glues. So if you take a little bit of heavy duty tape and you stick it right on top of the cap, it makes that process so much easier. If you ever used a hole saw to cut out a hole, you know if you made it just a little bit too small, it's nearly impossible to enlarge that just right without bouncing all over the place because there's nothing for the bit to grab on in the wood. Here's a little tip. If you take the original plug that you had cut out and you place it onto the bit right there, now when you go to drill this out, if you use that as a guide, you still might bounce around a little bit, but it should keep you within a small range of motion. Now here's a little preventive tip. Whenever you're cleaning up your shop, I strongly do not recommend cleaning it up with your dust collector. Here's why. Now, just in case you happen to have anything metallic like screws or nails, these bouncing around, hitting themselves, or potentially anything inside of your dust collection system could potentially create a spark. And a spark inside of a dust cloud could possibly cause a fire. And even though that might be a small chance, I strongly would not recommend using it to clean up your floors. Now, anytime you need to use a roller for the wall, before you start painting, before you even get paint on the roller, here's a little tip. A lot of times there's a little bit of fuzz and other kind of items stuck to this roller that you do not want to transfer up onto the paint. So if you take some tape and you roll it out, and then you take your roller and run it across that tape a few times, it'll remove all that loose fuzz and particles that might be on it. So that way you don't have to worry about it getting on your walls. Now, if you're married and you wear rings in your shop, I strongly recommend getting a silicone ring. The great thing about them is they're really flexible, so they're easy whenever you're grabbing tools. Also, when you have them on and say you get a tool hung in them, if you have to yank your hand away, the ring will tear and it won't tear your finger. So that way, you can easily just replace the ring and you don't have to worry about getting surgery on your finger. Now, anytime you're gluing up a joint, whether it's a dado, a rabbit, or even a butt joint, you're gonna have glue squeeze out when you clamp everything together. So here's a great way to prevent that. Now, right along the joint that you're putting together, it's a good idea to add some painter's tape right where everything comes together. You want it to be really close so that as you clamp everything together, glue will now squeeze out, but instead of it getting on your materials, it'll actually get on the painter's tape. Give it a couple minutes for any additional glue that might squeeze out, and then just carefully go in and remove the tape. And that should leave a nice, sharp, clean inside corner. Now, if you work outside of your home at a workshop and you take a lot of your tools with you, here's an old tip that has saved me a bunch of time and money. Now, on all the tools you're taking with you, it's a good idea to do some kind of a distinctive mark. If you notice on these two, I have two little dashes I just use a grinder on to make them very distinctive. That way, in case you're out working with somebody else and your tools get all mixed together, you can easily reach in and figure out which ones are yours. If you have an old table saw like this, you know dust collection, well, it's almost non-existent. Well, here's a great way to improve on that. Now, depending on how much room you have up on your saw, there's a good chance you'll be able to use one of these big gulp dust hoods. These are usually found with people using with the lathe. The great thing about it is you can hook up some PVC and you can hook up a nice dust collection hose unit. And that way you can easily attach it up under your saw. In many cases, you can use zip ties or even screws through these big outer edges to attach it. And then, once you have that in place, if you take some tape, in my case I'm using black because I have a dark saw, and you cover up all the little gaps that go along your saw, there's a very good chance that most of your dust is now going to be sucked into here and into your dust collection system. Anytime you buy a large quantity of glue, it's a good idea to put the date on it. The reason why is that woodworking glue has a shelf life of about 2 years, and that'll give you an idea of roughly how long you have left before this expires. Also, by putting the date on it allows you to know exactly how much you've used in a certain amount of time. For example, in 2 years, if I only used half, then I might cut back on exactly how much glue I use. In my case, I should be able to get through this in 2 years. But if you don't, that way you can buy new stuff and you don't have to worry about it being expired. Now, anytime you're trying to drill overhead, especially if it's a large saw like a hole saw, you're gonna make a lot of mess and that stuff's just gonna fall on you. That is, unless you try this little trick. Get you a paper plate or a very thin small box, put a hole right in the center, big enough so that the shaft can fit through without trying to spin the plate here, and then attach that to your drill or whatever you're using to spin it. Then as you use it, the plate or small box is gonna catch a majority of that stuff falling, thus keeping it out of your face and off the floor. Now, if you have a large dust collection system, you're definitely gonna have to replace the bag here and there. So to do that, it can be quite a big challenge, especially since the size of this, just the diameter of it, makes it real difficult to get the plastic over one side, hold it there, and still get it over the second side. I thought about using some tape, but because there's usually a dust residue all over your unit, it's gonna be really difficult unless you particularly clean off everything, then you might be able to use tape. An easier way would actually be buy some of these real rare earth magnets that will now position themselves real tightly against the plastic, thus holding it up. I'd suggest using 2 or 3 of these in particular places around it, and they'll act like another set of hands. So I hope that makes it easier whenever you need to replace your bag. Now anytime you're adding a finish to your project, a lot of times you'll have to put several coats on these, but leave hours in between, whether it's sand or just adding additional coats. And that can be a pain, especially if you have to open and close, open and close, open and close, and it's just a waste of time and effort. Instead, grab some plastic wrap, put over the top of it, and throw a quick rubber band over the top of it. And that way, next time we need it, just quickly peel it off, use it, repeat the process. And that way, when you're completely finished, then you can seal it up permanently. Have you ever been in your shop working? Oh man, there's not another wasp. Well, they can be such a pain. There is a great thing about wasps though. They're very territorial. So, if you can find and purchase one of these paper mache, it's just real simple, fake wasp nest decoy here, this should help deter them. Since they're very territorial, if they see this up at a distance, they're less likely to come to your area. Now, if you already have a nest up, there's a good chance this is not gonna stop them. So I strongly suggest putting these up in late winter or very, very early spring before everything has had a chance to start moving around. And this should help keep some of those wasps out of your shop. Now, if some of these tips and tricks helped you, I hope you're willing to take this video and share it with a friend so you can help them as well. Otherwise, get out in your shop and have fun building. Of 20. Can't even do my own intro. Your strop. Strop. Alright, outtakes galore. Whenever you're cleaning up your I keep trying to say strop. Yeah. You know the dust collecting. Wow.